All right. Well, good morning. It's fun for me going through the group that Rod has put on, the Timothy group with some other young men, where he encourages to really dig into the Word and share Scripture, and then always uses a caveat of like, how would you teach this? And so he's given us some great resources. One of whom I've really taken, and I would encourage you guys. You might actually notice some plagiarism today if you actually go back and watch this, but it's a gentleman by the name of Brad Gray. Brad's a phenomenal teacher and a real student and a historian. I think that's what I really appreciate. But anyway, he's got a site called Walking the Text. And so as we were getting ready to talk about John 8 in our group, I watched the video, and it was almost like if any of you were here during Christmas and I had the opportunity to teach about the Nativity. It was just these moments of clarity and some subject matter and history and the verses just popping out. And I was like, hey, Rod, do you have any plans for how this is going to be taught? I was like, so I want to volunteer. And he's like, absolutely. So thanks again for just giving me this opportunity. Thanks for you guys for all being here this morning, an hour early than normal, or with the time change. It feels very, very different, right? Rod actually texted me before, he's like, hey, are you awake? I was like, yes, my wife and I are just around the corner. It's good. He's like, well, it's happened before where people haven't shown up on time on this during the time change. So anyway, so it might surprise you. Maybe it doesn't surprise you if you know me really well that I was a knucklehead in school. That's the best way to describe it. Always wanted to challenge teachers. Always wanted to kind of be a little bit of the class clown. Thought that was the way to kind of earn some popularity and so on. But even though there was that, there was always the consequence to our grade school. And the biggest, most humiliating thing that could happen for a grade school, and this is probably like third, fourth grade, was having your name written on the chalkboard. And so these were the old school, like either green or black chalkboards. And always in the corner there was the list, and it was like the list of names of all the bad kids. And pretty traditionally my name was up there. And so, and then if you did something else wrong during the week, they would put a check mark next to that. And so there were consequences. You couldn't have like extra recess, or you had to sit out, or you got the really awesome job of sitting right next to the teacher, which I thought meant you were something special, but it was so she could keep an eye on you so you weren't goofing around in class. But it was that name that was up there was just like a glaring reminder to me and all my classmates that like I was in trouble. Something was going on. If we had folks that would come into the classroom or whatever, like that was like the first thing you would do if like you ever had to go into another teacher's classroom to participate in an activity. You would always look at the chalkboard to see whose name was on there. And like I said, mine was always on there. So it was kind of like this public humiliation and somewhat shame. And I know that seems very trivial compared to what we're going to jump in today. But I'll kind of show kind of a little bit later why I think of this and my name being written up there. So we're going to jump into chapter 8. So if you have your Bibles, welcome to open up. It's kind of actually the tail end of John 7, and then it will lead right into John chapter 8. And if you're looking in your Bibles, some of you may have this, and it seems really odd. Usually when I jump into the Word, I go right into the verses, and I don't read some of the ancillary things, but there's actually an italicized call out here, and it says, the earliest manuscripts do not have these verses, and so it's kind of the end of 7 and the beginning of 8. This is not at all a warning at all that like this didn't happen, or this isn't Jesus, or this shouldn't be here. What it is that this story actually these italicized kind of caveats happen twice in the New Testament. And so there's actually 5 different places in the manuscripts. Some is found in Luke. This account's found in John a couple times, where the historians and those that put together the context of the Bible weren't quite sure where it should actually fit. They know that it happened. There's no debate at all that this is Jesus, that this took place, and so on. But where does it fit? And as I sort of share with you today kind of why this fits here, specifically at John 8, hopefully you'll kind of catch on to that a little bit. It's more about the timing of the season. So as Rod was wrapping up chapter 7, we went through, and what we've been studying is this Festival of the Tabernacle, right? At the very end, we find Jesus in that ceremony. They're pouring this living water, where he finally admits and stands up before everybody and says, "I am living water. Those that are seeking, come and drink from me," right? And so we've got this idea of this festival that's taking place. The name of the festival, it's called Sukkot. That's what it's named of. And so what they're really doing during this festival of Sukkot, it's kind of more toward the fall season, so more toward the end of the year. So they're celebrating kind of three things: the past, the present, and the future. So the past being, throughout John, there's a lot of references to the trials and the tribulations of what was going on as the Jews were going through the desert, right? And kind of the provision that God gave to the Jews as they were honestly struggling, right? For the present, there's this opportunity for Thanksgiving. It's the gathering of their harvest, right? So this is their harvest time. So as they are all going into Jerusalem now in the present state, they're bringing all their goods, all that they have gathered. They're celebrating, they're sharing it with everybody, right? And so this is basically a celebration again for God's provision and all that they have at this time. They're also staying in tents and kind of like memorizing or memorializing really what happened in the desert. So that's where we get kind of the festival of the tabernacle, right? The idea that they were sleeping in these tents. So they would do that to kind of pay homage to what had happened in the desert. And then at the same time, they're also doing a tribute to the future, right? So as we're coming out of this season, this is a very dry season for them. They're getting ready to go into what they hope will be the waters that will come, these significant rains that will help for future crops, that's a sustainable water. I mean, they live in a very dry desert place, so they're really hoping that these waters will help continue to sustain them. So there are these prayers, and that's why they go and they get the golden pitcher and they're pouring it over the altar, right? And then Jesus, obviously, on this day, steps up and says, you know, basically, I am the living water, right? I'm what will sustain you if you believe in me. So this is kind of the place that's going on. So at the end of John, it's basically the end of Sukkot, so it's the last of the festival, right? People have come from thousands of miles to come to Jerusalem in their pilgrimage. So they've done that. So it basically says they've all gone home, right? The end of the Jewish day ends at sundown. So the festival is over. So basically people are going to their homes or going back to their camps or going basically to go and rest. It's been a long season and festival for them. So then it's basically talking about the next day, right? So this is the following day. It says, but Jesus went to the Mount of Olives. So when everybody went home, Jesus would oftentimes go to the Mount of Olives, right? This was a place where it's kind of his serenity. This is a place he would go and pray, a place where he could actually go and relax. It was a little bit away from the traditional like Jerusalem, right? But he could actually oversee and so on. So this is kind of his kind of little safe haven, if you will. So everybody goes home. And this is telling us where Jesus goes. Jesus goes to the Mount of Olives. But then early the next morning came, and he goes into the temple. So basically, he's going back into the public place, right? People are still there. They probably haven't all packed up and gone home yet. People are probably still kind of enjoying time with one another, right? They've traveled a long way. Or they're getting prepared to go back to kind of their more traditional home, if you will. So as he was there, right, it says all the people were coming to him. And so he sat down and began to teach them, right? And so again, remember, this is after the festival. This is the next day. So people are beginning to leave the city, but again, they're still around. They're learning learning directly from him. And so I think I have a picture, if you don't mind, Emily. So again, this would be the temple, right? So you've got the temple courts. So this is a very, very public place where people would come and they would gather. And this is significant because of what's going to happen next, right? He chooses to go into this public place. So then the next part goes, the scribes and the Pharisees brought a woman caught in adultery, and having set her in the center of the courts, they said to him, Teacher, this woman has been caught in adultery in the very act. So again, this is after the festival is over. He's in public. They could have brought this woman at any point in any time to see Jesus. They could have taken her somewhere to be ruled over, or could have explained what law she had broken, right, at any point in time to anybody else. But they're setting something up here. Again, a very public place. They're bringing this woman that was found in adultery directly into this court, right? So then we go on, and it says, Now the law of Moses commanded us to stone such a woman. What then do you say, asking Jesus, that they were saying this, testing him, so that they might have grounds to accuse him. But Jesus stooped down and with his finger started writing on the ground, right? So what test are they talking about? right? What are they trying to accuse him of? We already know there's some elaborate twist going on, right? The verse clearly says that. They're testing him. They want to accuse him of something. So what is it that they're trying to do? So this trick that they're talking about is they're directly referencing Old Testament, right? Moses' law, right? The law of God. And so it says this in Leviticus 20:10. If there is a man who commits adultery with another man's wife, one who commits adultery with his friend's wife, the adulterer and the adulteress shall surely be put to death. There's something missing here though, right? Again, remember where we're at. We're in the courts, very public place. Jesus is there. He's teaching. The Pharisees and the old folks, they're bringing this adulterous woman. Who's missing? Man, right? Because it also says this in Deuteronomy. If a man is found laying with a married woman, then both of them shall die. The man who laid with the woman and the woman. Thus you shall purge the evil from Israel. Right? So they're trying to twist this all up. They've presented this woman to Jesus. They brought her in this very public place. Right? And they're trying to trap him. So with these two verses, we know that they're basically referencing Old Testament. So Jesus is kind of put in this predicament, right? He's kind of in this odd pickle game that they have. So does he obey the Torah, which basically says what we've read, right? We found that this woman's committed an adultery. We should stone her. Or should we not? We also know that during this time, it's Roman occupied, which means in order to exercise capital punishment, Jews would have had to have asked permission. No permission's being asked, right? They're asking Jesus directly. And we know this to be true because even at the time when they were asking for Jesus' crucifixion, and they're screaming that out very loudly, crucify him, very early in the morning, by the way, where no one else could really hear, but they're asking for his crucifixion. They're basically protesting to the Romans to allow for this crucifixion to take place. So we know that's how it has to happen. So, huge pickle game, right? Do I obey Torah and acknowledge that I'm here for God, right, as Jesus, right? This is his decision, his dilemma, and say, okay, yeah, let's stone this woman. That's what the law says. But if I do that, then I also am in violation of Roman law, right? So now I could die myself. Or do I just say, no, don't worry about it. Let's just give her grace and let her go on. Now I've disobeyed God's law, right? So he's in a predicament here, right? No matter what he chooses to do, he can't. And the Pharisees and these people know this. This is the reason why they've chosen not only this place, but this time to do this, right? So let's see, what does Jesus do, right? Let me go here. So what he does is he just sits down and starts writing in the dirt. So that's where he's at. So you've got the Moses law, you've got basic God's law, you've got the Roman law, right? But there's a trifecta here too, and it's the timing, and this is why the timing is important. Can you pull up? So we were talking about this festival, right? So here's the Sukkot. It's the tabernacle, right? It's this 15 days. It's during the 7th month, so it's down toward like October-ish, if you will. There's this dry season, right? So we're going to go to the next slide. This is when this takes place. So here's how the festival is actually laid out, right? It starts with the Jewish New Year, and that's on the first day. And then you've got Yom Kippur, and then we just talked about Sukkot, right? And then basically this last day, the great day when the water gets poured out, okay? So why is this important? Well, on the first day, the New Year, there's basically this 10 days of awe. And what that basically is for Jewish folks, they would have an opportunity to really just sit over and just think, man, who have I offended? Who have I sinned against? Who do I need to ask forgiveness from, right? Because they're leading up to Yom Kippur, which Yom Kippur is a day of atonement. And so this is what this means, right? So Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, atones for a person's transgressions against God, but it does not atone for his transgressions against his fellow man until he's been appeased, right? So this is pretty significant. You've got 10 days to think of who you, brother to brother, right, us, who we've sinned against. Their big day, Yom Kippur, that atonement only happens for what they've done. So that's why they give these great sacrifices, right? They're basically saying what we have done against God, we want to be atoned for, okay? So we go down here, right? So David Stern actually writes a little bit about this. It It says that Hoshana Rabbah was understood to be the absolute final chance to have one's sins for the year forgiven. It's basically, the beginning of the new year. One asked to be inscribed in the book of life, and on Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, one hopes that that inscription would be sealed. This is a Jewish tradition that reminds us about that opportunity for forgiveness, right? Up until the dates. So why is this all really important, right? We've got the first day, the 10 days. We've asked for atonement. We're hoping to be sealed in there. Then we're basically praying. We're asking for this living water and so on. So basically this 15th to the 22nd day, there's kind of this grace period. So even though we have the Day of Atonement, we've asked for our transgressions to be forgiven, both to our fellow man and to God, they feel like there's this little bit of grace. This woman is brought in. Can you show it? Yep. The woman is brought into Jesus after the 22nd day. So here's the trifecta, right? The first being, you're going to break God's law? You're going to break Roman law? What are you going to do, Jesus? This woman has no grace left. There's no chance for her. So what are you going to do? So you can't forgive her, right? So do we stone her? Do we not stone her? She has no grace left. What are we going to do? So let's go on. But when the priests, when they persisted in asking him, he straightened up, right? So he's down right in the ground, and said to them, "He without sin among you, let him be the first to throw a stone at her." And when they heard it, they began to go one by one, beginning with the older one, oldest ones first, right? He was left alone and with the woman where they were in the center of the court, again, this very public place. And she said to the Lord, sorry, I skipped my place here, Rika. It was left alone and the woman was in the center of the court. She said, "No one, Lord." And Jesus said, "I do not condemn you either," right? So he asked, where'd they all go? And, is anybody here to condemn you? And she says, "No one, Lord." So Jesus says, "I do not condemn you either. Go from here and sin no more," right? So what's happening here? We've got this great elaborate plan. Jesus is stuck. He's got a choice to disobey God's law. He's got a choice to disobey Roman law. This woman has no grace left. So what can he do? Draw in the dirt, stands up and says, "If you are without sin, go ahead and cast the stones." And then they just all of a sudden start leaving. So something happened there, right? And I think as he's down there drawing in the ground or writing in the ground, there's a lot of speculation on what he was doing. Jesus did everything very intentionally. We know that, right? We've been given examples of that. So I think there are folks that says he started writing each of their sins in this dirt, right? This dry season, so there's dust on the ground. He's doing that. Some people say that maybe he was writing the Pharisees, the leaders, their mistresses' names out on there, right? Like that'd be pretty bad, right? There's a lot of people that think. Some people think that he just wasn't amused, right? Here they are coming to a public place to challenge me. Like, I don't care. I'm just going to sit here and just start doodling in the ground and just act like I have no care for what's going on. But something's happening here. And we know this because there's the word where they say that they heard and they began to left. Well, the Greek word is called akua. Am I saying that right? Akua. And so it does mean yes to hear, but it also means to obey and to leave. It's almost like a recognition, right? So something that they heard when Jesus stood up and said, "Those among you without sin, go ahead and cast that first stone." And what they were doing, automatically the light bulb went on for them, and they said, "I got it," and they started to leave, right? So I want to kind of jump into some of our table talk and allow you guys to kind of discuss some of this, right? So there's this amazing elaborate plan, had such timing, such precision, like there's no way outs. There's three different areas where Jesus can fail here, yet he says something very simple to them, and they just abandon it altogether. They just leave. They just walk out, right? So I want us to kind of think a little bit about that. I want us to think about what Jesus was writing in the dirt. What I would love for you to do also is put yourself in that place, that very public place where this woman is being drugged out of an adulterous bed and being placed before it. Like, how do you think you would feel, or what thoughts do you think would be going through your head, that type of thing? And then even for her, what thoughts do you think are going through her mind, right? Here she is drugged in front of everybody. I'm sure she knows some of these people. They know her. People may even be aware that she's this adulterous woman, but now it's being brought out in front of everybody. So I want you to kind of think about that. So if you guys, would mind maybe spending 10, 15 minutes, just kind of talk amongst yourselves and kind of go through those questions, and then we'll pick back up. Thanks for taking some time to do some of the table talk. Sound like some really great discussions. So as you guys are going, I mean, anybody feel like they want to volunteer like something from their table, or maybe like one of the answers to the question, or thoughts that they had while they were answering the questions they thought was maybe valuable or would like to share? Yeah, Kent.
This is one of my favorite stories because I think it applies to all of us. The verse that comes up in my mind is, "Judge not, lest you be judged."
Yeah.
And I think we all walk around with one of these in our pocket.
What is that?
A stone. It's a rock. Yeah. And I'm just looking for somebody to throw it at.
Yeah.
And then I think, no, better leave it in there unless they have a bigger one. But it teaches me that it could just as easily been any one of us dragged by the deputies into that court and called to account for something. And it sounds like in that culture, in that time, almost anything you did would be against one of those 600 plus laws and worthy of a rock, many. So I think it makes me measure how I respond when somebody cuts me off on the freeway or says something, "Wow, what a stupid moron." It's like, wait a minute, put the rock back. Just Bible self-check.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah, no, super good. Super good. Yeah, don't throw stones if you live in a glass house, right? So that could be another good one. Anybody else? Anything that they came across or thought of or felt like it? Yeah, Jim.
Yeah, we like the fact that, after everything's said and done, Jesus says, I do not condemn you, right? And that's the mercy and grace that we get when we come to God, right? And the other factor that he says, go and go from here now and sin no more, right? God doesn't want us sinning because we got the accuser in the world that wants to bring shame not only to us but to him, and say that we're not walking righteously, or and so it's just an awesome fact that Jesus just showed her compassion. He showed her the new covenant right there,
Yeah, no, super good. Anybody else? Yes.
Well, I think it's interesting that we were talking about this at our table, that they just went through the Day of Atonement. Here's forgiveness for individuals. I'm sure the Pharisees were obviously part of that, the nation of Israel. And this is only a short period of time after that. So whatever, there's endless speculation on what he's writing. It can come from all kinds of things, but whatever he was writing on the ground, each person there, each Pharisee or leader that was condemning her, it struck them between the time that they, were forgiven for their sins that they went through to that period of time. Whatever he wrote was so egregious that they just pierced their hearts, and they couldn't, they had to walk away. So I think that's pretty amazing, and I agree with Jim. We talked about the grace and love and forgiveness that the Lord, has for sinners, and so
Yeah.
that was powerful.
No, that's super good. Do you want to actually put that up for me, Emily? So yeah, so kind of a piggyback into that is, again, kind of this timeline, right? So we've got the trifecta, right? Like our last episode of where's Jesus now? He's got them, potentially in a spot where he could break the law of God, potentially break the law of the Romans, and then they kind of know this a little bit, right? So to the point, they feel like they've introduced this woman at a point that like there is no grace left, right? They honestly believe that there is kind of like the statute of limitations or like this timetable where it's like she has no grace. So how can you give her grace? She has none. Like we know this. She had up until the 22nd. Sorry, right? And they introduce her at this time.
How much more so does that apply to those men who are standing before Jesus condemning her with sin, probably guilty at the same level of...
No, I think that's a great point, right? Because it says that he took her out of the bed, but they could have had her for a few days, just waiting for the right time, right? Because they want to find him in this public space, right? Because the only way to really get Jesus is to do it in front of the masses, right? That was the whole idea. So there's this great elaborate plan, but then to the point, he's writing in the dirt, turns to them and says, if you don't, whoever doesn't have sin, go ahead, throw that first stone. They hear that. They see him. I mean, the jury's not even really out yet, but they decide to leave, right? So I want to kind of go off of what you guys were saying here of like, what was on the forefront of the minds of these Pharisees? They just came off of this season, right? They would know this beyond anyone. They teach this, right? So where does this come from? And I think there's some attachment here. So the first thing that I want to go to is actually Jeremiah, right? Jeremiah 2:13. It says this, "For my people have committed two evils. They have forsaken me, the fountain of living water, to hew for themselves cisterns, broken cisterns that can hold no water," right? So here he is. We just came off of this time where we're basically going to ask for living water to come, right? But they've forsaken the actual living water. They've forgotten about this, right? So then what does this really mean? So I think there's this issue of the heart, right? And so in Jeremiah 7:9-10, we have this. "The heart is more deceitful than anything or than all else, and it's desperately seek. Who can understand it? The Lord searches the heart, and it tests the mind, even to give each man according to his ways, according to the results of his deeds." Right? So again, it's about what's going on in someone's own heart. Right? So here's the connection. Continue down into Jeremiah 7:13. So, "O Lord, the hope of Israel, all who forsake you will be put to shame. Those who turn away on earth will be written down." Right? They know this verse. Those who have turned away, those that still have sin, those are going to be written down, right? This is the end of this dry season. There's dirt everywhere. They're being written down. So maybe it was their names. Maybe it was their sin, whatever it is. But they're drawing this connection, right, of this time. They think they've got him, this place, this public place. And now they're seeing this action beyond just the simple words of Jesus, but what he's doing in the dirt, right? He's writing it down, right? And it goes on. "Because they have forsaken the fountain of living water," right, "even the Lord." So they know this. So I think that is this great connection that we've all made, right? Speaking back to Jeremiah, it wasn't just simply like, oh, how can you judge her if you've got sin in your own life? Like, go, if you don't, throw the first stone. It's that action. They know these verses, and there he is writing potentially their names down, right? So then I want to talk about this topic of condemning, right? We all know this. Jesus didn't come to the world to judge us, right? He didn't come to the world to judge anybody at that time. He came to save it, right? To save it through grace. And I think that's the big topic here, right? The takeaway is the grace and the truth. So before the woman even shows up to the courts or is actually caught and is provided this grace by Jesus, I think grace started in God's version before that. I think many of us have had sin. We know those have been guilty of sin. But I think it's when that sin is actually found out, that we're actually called out, that we have to acknowledge it. We can't escape it anymore. I think that's where true grace comes from, right? I think we all still have consequences of our sin, don't get me wrong. There are things that we've done in our lives that, we will always have someone, pointing at us or reminding us of, or even sometimes still have that guilt and shame. And so for that, I think when it comes to an event like that in our own lives, or we've seen it with other people, there's kind of two roads that somebody can take, right? They can take that road that's complete rejection of like, I don't need God, I can do it all on my own, like everybody else is wrong, so what that I sinned, everybody sins, right? And they go down this really deep, dark, rough path. And I think there's this other one that kind of like releases us from that, right? There's this opportunity to acknowledge your sin, to have others know it, so they can come alongside you. And that's where we see Jesus in this moment with this woman, right? So I think her grace actually started in just the events unfolding in God's will and his timing that like, man, she was found out. So one of the questions I asked too is, what do you think's going through her mind? Because up until this point, as she's drugging out, however long they've had her, or wherever she was found, immediately she knows the law too, right? I'm going to get stoned to death. Today I'm going to die. Not only is she probably publicly nude and shamed and embarrassed, but on her mind has to be weighing like, today's the day I'm going to die. And it doesn't happen, right? Through God's grace, it doesn't happen. And so I think that's the opportunity, going back to having stones in our pocket. I think we see in society, I wanted to find or Google a celebrity. Rod kind of said, hey, do you know of a good story or a good account of somebody where maybe something similar has happened? And you can find it all over the place, but some of it's kind of disgusting, and I kind of felt like, would it be kind of contrary for me to bring up somebody else's life into this, right, and kind of judge them in a moment, or have us all try to relate in some way? So I stayed away from that because there was just so much. But I think we all have seen that, and have all been guilty of it, right? You see the police, they have a car pulled over, and it's like, oh, what did he do, right? Like, yeah, get him, right? My kids are in the back like, that's the sound of the police. Like, okay, guys. I think we all want to do that, right? We all want to walk into the classroom, and we want to see whose name's on the board, who has the most check marks, right? Who's been guilty of acting up in class, so that we can point the finger at them and ridicule them and laugh at them, when it's really just an opportunity that after everybody leaves, which everybody did, right? We can sit with them in the middle of their mess and just be like, it's good, you're okay, right? And who does that better than anybody? Jesus. So one of the things I wanted to share with you, I believe it's Romans 8. Is that what was referenced in the letter recently to Beacon Light? So this is kind of cool. So again, God's timing, right? But Rod had made reference recently, Romans 8. So I'll read through this a little long. Therefore, there is no condemnation for those who are in Christ Jesus. For the law of the Spirit of life in Christ Jesus has set you free from the law of sin and death. For what the law could not do, weak as it is, through the flesh, God did, sending his own Son in the likeness of sinful flesh, and as an offering for sin. He condemned the sin in flesh, so that the requirement of the law might be fulfilled in us. But do not walk according to the flesh, but according to the Spirit. For those who are according to the Spirit, the things of the Spirit. For the mind set on the flesh is death, but the mind set in the Spirit is life and peace. Because the mind is set on the flesh is hostile toward God, for it does not subject itself to the law of God, for it is not even able to do so. And those who are in the flesh cannot please God. All right? So it's a great, healthy reminder that, like, you're no longer condemned. Whatever sin in your life, whatever sin maybe you're even witnessing, right? Like, God's already paid for that. He already died for that. And that's why when he's sitting with that woman and he basically forgives her and allows her to leave as well, right? He's not condemning her, but just says, sin no more. So I wanted to show you guys kind of an illustration of this. Do you mind pulling up? It made me think of this, like, when our sin is exposed, another Google fact, try to Google negative photos. It's super hard. Like, we live in an age now that doesn't know the existence of negatives or true photography anymore. So this is a negative photo. Is probably one of the best ones that I can find. And when you see it, like, it feels like you can see, like, all the flaws, right? You can see just these darks, and it just looks ugly, and it looks like it's a mess, and it's just super, super disgusting. But once that's exposed to light, it becomes a super beautiful picture, right? Colors are vibrant, things look beautiful. It's water. It's not like a sewage plant that I thought it was originally, right? Like, it's actually something pretty significant, right? It was just an illustration that played on my mind as Rod and I were talking about this, like, and we're thinking about that. But what God is asking, though, and any of you that have photographs or old photographs, is like, here's your opportunity, right? You had that negative. Now we have this nice, beautiful picture. We pull up the two side by side. So you had this negative. Now you have this new, beautiful picture. That is us, right? And our sin, after it's exposed, we have this opportunity for all of that mess to go away, and we have this beautiful picture. But those pictures, if you've carried them around or had them in albums, you have to take care of them. You can't continue to sin. You can't continue to put it through the same mess or the same ringer, because they get creases in it, they get ruined, they get destroyed, and that could easily be our lives if we don't acknowledge that, right? And so that's that idea of, like, go and sin no more, right? So that was something that I wanted to put there. So all this kind of coming together. So you've got this super dirty place. Jesus is writing. It's the end of the dry season. Living water has come now, right? But in the form of Jesus. Jesus coming to see this exposed sin and so on that has gone on in this woman's life. He lets her go. But you also notice he never at any time judged any of the men for trying to spring this trap at him, to trying to, like, ridicule this woman. I mean, that's not how he would have wanted it to happen. That's not how they wanted it to take place, right? But he allowed them to begin to slip out. Because again, this is about him not condemning anyone's sin, right? He's allowing them to go and basically deal with the judgment in their own heart as they go forward. So we'll go down into Romans 6. What shall we say then? Are we to continue to sin so that grace may increase? May it never be. Who shall we who die in sin still live in it? Or do you not know that all of us who have been baptized in Jesus Christ have been baptized into his death? Therefore we have been buried with him through baptism in death, so that as Christ was risen from death through the glory of the Father, so we too may walk in the newness of life. For if we have become united with him in the likeness of his death, certainly we shall also be in the likeness of his resurrection. Knowing this, that our old self is crucified with him, in order that our body of sin might be done away with, so that we may no longer be slaves to sin. For he who has died is freed from sin. Right? So this is the topic of our salvation. It's an opportunity for us just to realize that, like, yes, our sin was attached to him. He died for that. He was crucified for that. But just like he was born and risen again, right? He died, he defeated death and came through. So can we, right? We can raise up. Those of you that have been baptized or have been saved or have found your own salvation, I mean, this is the great opportunity for all of us, right? It's the calling for all of us. And so, yeah. What's really awesome, again, talking about the living water, so here we go, right? They're praying for these sustaining waters that will come, but the only sustaining water for all of us is Jesus, is our salvation, is him coming. Us thirsting for him, us partaking of him, drinking from him, we will always have this living water within us for those that choose to partake, right? So those names that were all written there, just imagine this big, giant bucket of water being sloshed across, the living water coming, these rains that they were praying for coming, and just basically wiping that all clean. The slate is now clean. So going back to my school age things, I hated walking up to the board, writing my name, putting the check marks, and seeing that sit there for the night. But one of my favorite tasks that a teacher could assign me to do was usually happened on a Friday. They would bring in the sponge, right? The sponge of water, and you could do that. And all of the dust, all of the debris, all of the marks the teacher had put on there, whether it was my name or it was my name. Or it was some of the teachings and stuff like that they had done had been sticking to that board all week long. But then we could come in and, man, it was like a fresh new bunch of paint, right? We just got to just basically take that water and wash it all clean. Yeah? Awesome. Thanks, guys.
Well, let's rise up and sing in response.